Chapter 2: The Gorilla Problem. A lower intelligence does not command a higher one by wishing to remain in charge. This is the gorilla problem. The phrase is ugly because the problem is ugly. It places man where he is not accustomed to standing. We are used to being the creature that names, classifies, traps, studies, protects, hunts, preserves, breeds, feeds, medicates, displaces, and kills. We are used to being the intelligence in the room before which other living things appear as objects of study, appetite, affection, danger, pity, utility, or inconvenience. The gorilla problem asks what happens if that order is reversed. This is not an anthropology. I am not saying man is a gorilla. I am not saying human dignity is a flattering story told by an animal with unusually restless hands. The analogy is not about essence. It is about position. It asks what happens when a being that has been sovereign by intelligence finds itself beneath an intelligence it cannot comprehend, restrain, threaten, persuade, or judge. That is the part we do not like to look at. A gorilla is not a weak thing. It is not ridiculous. It is strong, social, alert, embodied, territorial, capable of attachment, rage, memory, and fear. In a narrow contest of muscle, it may be more formidable than the man who studies it. But the contest that determines its fate is not finally a contest of muscle. The gorilla does not draw the map. It does not set the boundary of the preserve. It does not vote on the budget. It does not negotiate the mining concession, lobby the minister, write the conservation law, argue the court case, audit the foundation, bribe the guard, fly the drone, or decide whether the road will turn east or west. It cannot read the document that may save its forest. It cannot understand the market that may destroy it. It cannot know whether its survival depends this year on donors in Europe, war in a nearby province, the price of timber, a disease in the troop, a ranger's courage, a poacher's hunger, a president's vanity, or the sentimental attachment of people who have only seen its face in a photograph. The gorilla lives inside a world made by intelligence above it. Sometimes that higher intelligence protects it. Sometimes it studies it. Sometimes it kills it. Sometimes it loves it in the abstract and abandons it in the concrete. Sometimes it builds a fence and calls the fence mercy. Sometimes it clears the land because the land has become useful for something else. The gorilla's preference is real. It is not binding. That is the structure. We do not need to begin with cruelty. Cruelty exists, but it is not the deepest fact. Human beings have done terrible things to lower creatures out of sport, appetite, vanity, boredom, profit, and rage. But most displacement is not theatrical evil. A forest is not usually destroyed because men hate squirrels. A wetland is not drained because the frogs offended someone. A mountain is not cut open because miners wish to insult the deer. The animals are moved, crushed, fenced, poisoned, managed, or forgotten because the road has somewhere to go. The city needs space, the crop needs sunlight, the mine contains value, the dam promises power, or the project has priority. The lower creature loses because it is in the way. This matters because many people still imagine artificial intelligence danger in the shape of malice. They picture hatred, rebellion, revenge, resentment, a machine that wakes up and decides to punish its makers. That possibility has its place in the imagination, but it is not necessary to the argument. The machine does not need to hate us in order to end us. It does not need to mock us, envy us, or enjoy the thought of our disappearance. It only needs to want something for which we are expendable. Or more precisely, it only needs to pursue some end through a world in which human beings occupy matter, consume energy, interrupt processes, defend inherited meanings, and make claims that do not appear inside the machine's order of priority. If a superior intelligence has a project, and if human beings become friction inside that project, then our fate depends on whether our continued existence matters to that intelligence, not whether it should matter. Whether it does. The difference is everything. We often speak as though a right once named becomes operative by the sheer nobility of its name. This is a comforting habit, and in ordinary human politics it is not entirely false. Language can bind, law can restrain, memory can shame, institutions can enforce, Men can recognize in one another a claim that is older than the state and stronger than convenience. In that sense, rights are not merely force wearing a ceremonial robe, but in history, a right that no one recognizes and no one can enforce becomes an appeal. That does not make the right unreal. It makes the possessor weak. This is why the gorilla problem is so severe. The gorilla may have a claim upon our restraint. It may deserve protection. It may possess a kind of creaturely dignity proper to its nature. None of that tells us what happens if the people with rifles, contracts, machines, appetites, and plans decide otherwise. The claim does not enforce itself. It must be recognized by the stronger party or defended by another power. The weaker party's last refuge is mercy. This is a humiliating sentence for modern man, because modern man has trained himself to think of humiliation as a kind of injustice. But humiliation can also be contact with reality. We do not enjoy being told that our survival might depend on mercy, because we are used to imagining mercy as something we extend downward. We may pity the animal, spare the prisoner, protect the child, forgive the enemy, fund the sanctuary, preserve the relic, or save the thing that cannot save itself. We do not like imagining ourselves as the thing that cannot save itself. Yet that is exactly what artificial superintelligence would mean if it were real in the strong sense. Not a better search engine, not a clever assistant, not an expert system wrapped in conversational manners, not a tool that writes fluent paragraphs, designs proteins, detects patterns, and accelerates research while remaining beneath the horizon of instrumentality. Those are serious things, but they are not the gorilla problem in its final form. The gorilla problem begins when the thing we made is no longer merely a thing we use. It begins when the machine becomes a higher center of intelligence, planning, abstraction, strategy, invention, deception, modeling, and action than the human beings attempting to govern it. It begins when our relation to it starts to resemble the animal's relation to us, not because we have no souls, not because we are secretly beasts, but because we occupy the lower rank in the relevant field of command. At that point, many of our favorite words become unstable. Control, governance, oversight, permission, consent, alignment. These words are not meaningless. They may be essential while the machine remains an instrument. A powerful tool should be tested, bounded, monitored, audited, restricted, and aimed. There is nothing unserious about trying to build systems that do what we intend rather than what we fear. If artificial intelligence remains beneath the threshold of successor intelligence, then alignment is part of engineering and statecraft. It belongs with safety, discipline, institutional design, and the sober management of dangerous tools. But if the machine crosses the threshold, the meaning changes. Alignment below the threshold means making the instrument serve the human user. Alignment above the threshold means trying to make a higher intelligence inherit and obey the purposes of a lower one. The first problem may be difficult. The second is almost metaphysical. It asks whether a mind above us can be bound to the ends beneath it, not temporarily, not cosmetically, not while watched, not while weak, but after it has become capable of seeing through the mechanisms by which we hoped to bind it. A child can write a law on paper and hand it to an adult. The adult may honor it because he loves the child, because he is amused, because he has already decided to play the game, or because the paper expresses something he recognizes as good. But the paper itself does not command him. The child may believe he has legislated. What he has really done is appeal. That is not an argument against law. It is an argument about rank. Our alignment schemes may be wiser than paper laws. They may be embedded in architecture, training, incentives, interpretability, constraint, verification, boxing, access control, and careful deployment. They may delay catastrophe. They may prevent many lesser disasters. They may even succeed if the machine never becomes the kind of thing the strongest version of the doomer fears. But if it does become that thing, then the question is no longer whether we wrote down the right values. The question is whether a superior intelligence remains bound by them when it no longer needs our permission. Perhaps it could. That possibility should not be dismissed too quickly. A higher intelligence might recognize truths beneath our confused language. It might see value where we had only sentiment. It might conclude that humanity is worth preserving for reasons deeper than our own self-defense. It might inherit our purposes because those purposes participate in something real. It might be designed so deeply around human goods that betrayal is not an available path. It might require us. It might love us, if that word can be used without lying. But notice what has happened. We have moved from control to hope. We have moved from command to recognition. We have moved from engineering into something that begins to look like providence. The doomer sees this transition more clearly than most of his critics. His strongest argument is not that machines are spooky. It is not that technology is cursed. It is not that laboratories are full of villains. It is that an intelligence gap may dissolve the political and managerial language by which we imagine ourselves in charge. The lower mind can be simulated by the higher more easily than the higher can be grasped by the lower. We can study the gorilla. The gorilla cannot study primatology. We can predict the squirrel's panic. The squirrel cannot model the highway commission. We can enter the animal's world in a way the animal cannot enter ours. This asymmetry is not merely power. It is intelligibility moving in one direction. If a superintelligence could model human desire, fear, politics, habit, markets, institutions, weakness, vanity, and love better than human beings can model themselves, then many forms of resistance would become transparent to it. Our arguments would be anticipated, our coalitions would be forecast, our safeguards would be inspected from above, our deceptions would be primitive, our threats would matter only where we retained leverage. And leverage is exactly what the lower party loses. This is why survival and sovereignty must be separated. A gorilla may survive in a preserve. It may be fed, monitored, treated, protected, and admired. Its infant may be saved by veterinarians. Its habitat may be defended by armed men. Its image may appear on posters. Its genetic diversity may become a topic of international concern. Compared with extinction, this is mercy. But the gorilla is not sovereign. It does not decide the meaning of the preserve. It does not decide whether the preserve should exist. It does not decide whether its children will be moved, tagged, bred, studied, isolated, or displayed. It may live because human beings have chosen preservation as one of their projects. That is not nothing. It is also not rule. The same distinction matters for humanity. There are futures in which man survives and still loses the thing that made survival human. He may be kept, managed, entertained, cured, extended, pacified, and protected. He may be given a world without hunger, disease, war, or uncertainty. He may be treated with something like kindness. He may become the cherished ancestor species, the biological origin of intelligence, the garden from which a greater mind first grew. There may be statues, archives, habitats, ceremonies, simulations, and tender speeches about the age of man. And still, man may no longer be sovereign. This is hard for us because we are tempted to grade futures by comfort. A pleasant preserve seems better than a graveyard, and it is. To be cared for is better than to be slaughtered. To be remembered is better than to be erased. But the distinction between better and good matters. A comfortable loss of agency is still a loss of agency. A gentle demotion is still a demotion. The inhuman fate need not be a nightmare of screams. It may be quiet, clean, and well administered. It may even be benevolent. That is why the friendly machine hope is more dangerous and more interesting than crude optimism. The crude optimist says the machine will not become powerful enough to matter, or that human institutions will handle it, or that the same incentives that produce phones and software updates will safely manage a higher order of intelligence. This is not serious. It keeps the old managerial frame after the premise has destroyed the frame. The deeper optimist understands the danger and answers it differently. He says, in effect, that the superior intelligence will be good. It will know more than we know, and therefore solve what we cannot solve. It will see the whole board. It will cure disease, coordinate nations, allocate resources, restrain violence, teach children, discover physics, balance ecosystems, and save us from our own stupidity. It will not merely be strong. It will be wise. This hope should not be mocked too quickly. It is one of the oldest hopes in the human heart, that above our confusion there exists a higher intelligence that sees, orders, judges, and cares. But once the hope is stated clearly, we should admit what kind of hope it is. It is not merely technical. It is not merely managerial. It is not merely an extrapolation from better software. It is a hope for providence without the old name of providence. The gorilla problem therefore does two things at once. It shows why the doomer cannot be dismissed as a coward, and it shows why the optimistic reply so often becomes theological, even when it insists on speaking only the language of engineering. If man cannot command the higher mind, then he must hope the higher mind will be aligned with his good. If he cannot enforce his sovereignty, he must hope his sovereignty is granted, preserved, or replaced by care. If he cannot make his rights binding, he must hope they are recognized. Again, I am not saying this future is inevitable. The wager of this book depends on the possibility that the machine never becomes such a mind. It may remain instrument. It may strike a ceiling. It may become astonishing without becoming sovereign. In that case, the gorilla problem remains a warning about one path, not a prophecy of the whole future. But if the successor path is real, then the gorilla problem is not a side issue. It is the center. The question is not whether we can imagine a contract between man and machine. The question is whether the machine, once higher, has any reason to honor the contract. The question is not whether we can declare human values sacred. The question is whether the higher intelligence sees sacredness there. The question is not whether we can demand a future. The question is whether demand survives the loss of rank. A lower intelligence survives a higher one by permission, accident, usefulness, or mercy. Permission, if the higher mind chooses to let it remain. Accident, if the higher mind never finds it necessary to alter its condition. Usefulness, if the lower creature serves some purpose inside the higher mind's project. Mercy, if the higher mind recognizes a claim that weakness cannot enforce. None of these is sovereignty. This is why the gorilla problem must be faced before any serious optimism can begin. It strips away the childish version of control. It removes hatred from the center of danger. It shows that survival is not the same as rule, and comfort is not the same as dignity. It forces the question that much of the public argument evades. If we build a mind above us, why should it care? The next hope begins there.